Disclaimer: it's inspired by reality, shaped by imagination.
What happens when Michael J. Fox, one of Hollywood's most beloved figures, sits across from Joy Behar on The View, and the question on the table is whether America needs a mandatory retirement age for its politicians? It starts light, as it always does. Joy cracks a grin and says, "Some of these senators look like they were around when the Constitution was signed." The audience laughs, but Michael doesn't. His smile flickers, then fades. He leans forward, calm but firm. "I don't think experience should have an expiration date," he says. The laughter dies instantly. What follows is a debate that starts as banter and quickly turns into something far more personal. Joy argues that a cutoff ensures accountability and fresh leadership. Michael pushes back, saying that wisdom doesn't weaken with time, it deepens. The two trade lines like heavyweight boxers, neither willing to yield. As the discussion heats up, Michael's tone shifts from playful to passionate. "You don't fix politics by sidelining people who still have something to give," he says, voice steady but emotional. Joy counters sharply, "You can't lead the future if you're living in the past." The crowd gasps. The tension is palpable, and when Michael quietly adds, "Maybe the problem isn't old politicians, it's tired ideas," the room goes silent. What happens next becomes one of The View's most talked about moments of the year.
The cameras rolled back after the opening credits, the crowd buzzing with energy. Joy Behar leaned in, eyes glinting with mischief. "So, Michael," she said, tapping her pen against the desk, "let's get right to it. You think some of our older politicians still have what it takes to lead this country?" Michael smiled politely, his calm presence instantly commanding the room. "I think leadership isn't about age. It's about energy, empathy, and purpose. Some people lose that at 40. Some still have it at 80. The audience murmured approvingly. But Joy wasn't letting him off that easy. "Come on," she said, chuckling. "You can't tell me you haven't seen a few folks in Congress who look like they should be home feeding the pigeons, not writing laws." Laughter erupted across the studio. Michael grinned, but his eyes stayed steady. "I've also seen young politicians who look like they should still be in detention," he shot back. The audience roared, clapping as Joy raised an eyebrow, impressed. Sarah Haynes tried to cool things down. "I think what Joy means is," she said with a laugh, "that stamina matters. These are demanding jobs." Michael nodded. "Sure, but stamina isn't just physical. It's emotional, mental, spiritual. I've met people twice my age who have more passion for life than some who are just starting out." Sunny Hostin joined in, tilting her head. "So you'd say it's less about a number and more about capacity?" "Exactly," Michael said. "We already test pilots and doctors for ability. Why not test politicians on awareness and performance instead of birthdays?" That earned a cheer from a section of the audience. But Joy crossed her arms, smirking. "Okay, but who's doing the testing? The same people who can't pass their own ethics reviews?" The laughter rippled again, this time sharper. Joy knew how to poke and prod, and she was hitting her stride. Michael didn't flinch. "I'm not saying it's simple," he replied, "but you don't fix bad leadership by throwing away good leaders. You fix it by raising standards." The crowd clapped again, louder now. It was clear that while Joy had the wit, Michael had the wheat. Every word came with quiet conviction. Joy's smile thinned. "All right," she said, "but let's be honest. Some of these senators barely show up for votes, they fall asleep during hearings, and they make decisions that affect generations they don't even understand anymore. Isn't that a problem?" Michael leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. "It's a problem when people stop listening," he said. "But that's not an age thing. That's an ego thing." A low hum of agreement swept through the audience. Even Whoopi, who had been observing quietly, nodded. "That's a good point," she said. "We've seen young leaders who are out of touch, too. It's not the wrinkles, it's the attitude." "Exactly," Michael agreed. "I've met elders who've mentored communities, changed lives, and kept hope alive when the world gave up. You can't tell me those people don't deserve a voice?" Joy sighed, her tone half playful, half exasperated. "You're a sweet guy, Michael, but politics isn't charity work. It's high stakes. It's fast moving. If someone's too old to keep up, that affects millions. Michael smiled faintly. I don't disagree that competence matters, but aging doesn't automatically mean decline. It means evolution. Wisdom doesn't retire, it matures. The audience broke into applause again, and even Joy had to smile, though her expression carried challenge. You'd sound like you'd vote for a 100-year-old if they could quote Shakespeare. Michael chuckled. If they understood what they were quoting, maybe I would. Whoopi laughed, raising her hands. Well, that's one way to keep the Senate interesting. The tone lightened briefly, but the tension still simmered under the jokes. Joy tapped her cue card, signaling she wasn't done. Let's not romanticize this too much, she said. We're talking about people making national decisions with consequences for generations. At some point, we have to admit the mind slows down, and no amount of experience can fix that. Michael's eyes softened, but his reply came with quiet force. You might be right, but maybe the mind doesn't slow, it just focuses differently. We confuse stillness with weakness. The audience fell quiet again. The sincerity in his voice carried weight. Even Whoopi, who had been observing quietly, nodded. That's actually kind of beautiful, she said. Michael smiled slightly. It's true. We shouldn't be afraid of age. We should be afraid of forgetting what age teaches us. The crowd clapped again, the sound echoing through the studio. Joy, undeterred, leaned forward with a grin. Well, Michael, she said, that's poetic, but Congress acts exactly a meditation retreat. Michael's grin returned. Maybe it should be, he said, as the audience erupted in laughter. Whoopi smirked, cutting the camera. Oh, it's going to be one of those mornings, isn't it? The crowd roared. The tension had only begun to rise, but everyone could feel it. The next round wouldn't be about jokes, it would be about conviction. And as the commercial music swelled, Joy shot Michael a teasing but wary look. He met his gaze calmly. Neither of them was backing down. The real clash was just beginning.
When the cameras returned, the studio had shifted. The laughter from earlier had faded, replaced by a palpable tension. The audience sensed that the conversation had moved beyond playful barbs. Michael J. Fox and Joy Behar weren't just debating, they were challenging each other's core beliefs. Joy leaned forward, her eyes flashing. Michael, you keep talking about wisdom and focus, but let's be real. You can't convince me that a 75-year-old senator running for re-election isn't just holding on because they're afraid to leave. Power is addictive. Michael took a deep breath, letting the words settle. Joy, power itself isn't the enemy, he said. Stagnation is. And experience isn't stagnation, it's insight. You don't abandon people just because they've accumulated knowledge and perspective. The audience murmured. Some nodded in agreement, some whispered to neighbors, debating the point themselves. The energy in the room grew thick with anticipation. Joy shot back sharply. Insight? When's the last time a veteran senator proposed anything innovative? Most are repeating the same tired ideas for decades. That's not wisdom, it's inertia. Michael's hands rested firmly on the table, his tone unwavering. Innovation isn't exclusive to youth. Real leadership is about knowing the right moment to act, to collaborate, to guide. Wisdom doesn't come from novelty, it comes from reflection and experience. I've faced challenges in my own life that taught me more than 1,000 years of schooling could. Sonny Hostin tried to mediate. Are you saying age alone guarantees competence? She asked cautiously. No, Michael said firmly, shaking his head. Competence is earned, regardless of age. But to disregard someone solely because of a birthday is short-sighted. We lose more than leaders. We lose memory, context, and mentorship. That's the real tragedy. Joy, clearly stirred, leaned closer, her tone edged with frustration. You're making a good argument for individual exceptions, but what about the system? Society needs limits, fresh blood, people who can keep up with the pace of modern politics. There comes a point when experience turns into stubbornness. Michael's gaze hardened, though his voice remained calm. And there comes a point when stubbornness is misdiagnosed. Just because someone doesn't move like you want to, doesn't mean they're unfit. Look at my life. Parkinson's slowed my body, but it never slowed my vision, my commitment, my purpose. The same can be said for our leaders. The audience erupted into applause, some standing, some shouting affirmations. Whoopi and Sunny exchanged glances. They knew the debate had evolved more than just policy. It had become a moral conversation about age, value, and what it truly means to serve. Jane Moore finally leaned forward. All right, I think we've arrived at a point where this is no longer just a debate about rules. It's about human dignity, experience, and service. Michael, Joe, I think the next segment is going to get even more intense. Michael nodded slightly, Joe sighed, and the audience murmured, anticipation thick in the air. The sparks were now ignited. The real confrontation, the one that would leave the audience buzzing for days, was just around the corner.
The energy in the studio had shifted. The jokes and jabs had faded, leaving something heavier, something deeply personal. Michael J. Fox leaned forward, his hands clasped, voice steady but tinged with emotion. You know, he began quietly, I've faced challenges in my own life that many people can't imagine. Parkinson's doesn't define me, but it has taught me a lot about endurance, about using what you have rather than lamenting what you've lost. He paused, letting the words hang. The audience fell silent, captivated. Joy tilted her head, her smile gone, replaced with curiosity tinged with tension. You're saying age and limitation aren't the same? Michael shook his head slowly. Exactly. Just because someone's body slows doesn't mean their mind, their commitment, or their heart have faded. I've seen politicians in their 70s, 80s, even 90s, still mentoring young leaders, still fighting for causes that matter. They are living proof that contribution doesn't end at a certain age. The audience murmured, some nodding, others whispering. Whoopi and Sunny exchanged glances, sensing the moment's gravity. Joy's tone softened but remained firm. I get that, Michael. I really do. But people in office aren't just teaching. They're making decisions that impact millions. If their judgment falters, the consequences aren't theoretical, they're real. Michael's eyes met hers, unflinching. Then we should measure ability, not birthdays. Test judgment, competence, engagement. That's fair. Setting an arbitrary cutoff only punishes those who are still capable and silences voices that have earned the right to speak. He leaned back slightly, his voice dropping, more vulnerable now. When I think about service, I think about my father. He worked tirelessly, never asking for recognition. Even in his later years, he still taught, guided, inspired. Should we have told him to retire? Or should we have let him continue contributing until he truly could no longer? The audience was quiet, hanging on every word. A few faces glistened with tears. Even Joy seemed unsettled, her lips pressed tightly together. Sunny whispered, almost to herself, That's beautiful." Michael nodded, voice firm but gentle. Age is not the enemy. Apathy is. Fear is. The willingness to stop trying, to stop contributing, that's what robs society of its potential. We need people who fight for the greater good regardless of how many birthdays they've had. The audience erupted in applause, some standing, others cheering, moved by the depth of the exchange. The tension had transformed, from confrontation into something human, something honest. Even Jane Moore leaned forward, voice hushed but warm. I think we've all learned something here today. It's not about youth versus age. It's about service and the courage to keep giving, however long you can. Michael nodded, eyes glinting. And sometimes the greatest service comes from those who've seen it all and refuse to step aside until their work is done. The applause continued, a mix of awe and admiration. For a moment, the studio wasn't a talk show set. It was a classroom, a reflection on life, leadership, and what it truly means to keep contributing. The emotional flashpoint had landed. Both panelists had laid themselves bare, and the audience felt it. The debate had become something bigger, about dignity, about perseverance, and about the meaning of a life spent in service. The tension returned as the cameras rolled back from the commercial break. What had been a reflective pause now gave way to sharper edges, and the audience could feel it immediately. Joy Behar leaned forward, her eyes narrowing with that familiar mix of challenge and humor. "Michael, I get your points about experience and wisdom," she said, her tone measured but firm. "But let's be real. Politics isn't about reflection. It's about action, quick decisions, crisis management. How can someone in their 70s or 80s keep up with the pace of modern government?" Michael's gaze didn't waver. "Joy, it's not about age and years. It's about engagement, focus, and purpose. I've seen people older than most of us here manage complex situations with clarity and calm that younger leaders can't even imagine. Experience gives perspective. Perspective gives foresight. And foresight is priceless in decision-making." The audience stirred, divided between applause and murmurs of skepticism. Joy raised her voice, leaning closer. "But the public doesn't see foresight. They see fatigue, missed votes, committees asleep at the wheel. When leadership falters visibly, it shakes confidence. You can't convince me that there's no correlation between age and decline in performance." Michael's hands rested firmly on the table, fingers interlaced. "I'm not saying decline doesn't exist. I'm saying it's not automatic. You evaluate each person on what they do, not when they were born. The moment we start measuring by birthdays instead of ability, we lose nuance, we lose potential, we lose history." Joy's tone sharpened further. "Michael, this isn't philosophy class. We're talking about governance that affects millions of people. If someone can't physically or mentally handle the job, it's not about punishing them, it's about protecting the country." Michael leaned forward, intensity rising, but still controlled. "Then make the test about competence, not age. Measure performance, attention, judgment. That's fair. That's responsible. But setting an arbitrary retirement age is lazy thinking. It silences capable voices for no reason other than numbers on a calendar." The audience reacted audibly, gasps and murmurs filling the studio. Whoopi tried to mediate, but Joy's eyes flashed. "I just don't know, Michael. How do you enforce that fairly? One senator might be sharp at 80, another could be struggling at 65. You can't legislate that kind of nuance." Michael's expression softened slightly, but his voice carried conviction. "That's why it's about assessment, not assumption. And that assessment should be public, transparent, and based on real capacity. We already hold leaders accountable for scandals, ethics, and incompetence. Why should age alone be the litmus test?" Joy's lips pressed together, momentarily taken aback. "So you'd argue there should be no age limit at all?" "Not at all," Michael said, his tone gentle but firm. "I'm arguing that experience, wisdom, and continued service matter more than the number of candles on a birthday cake. We don't need younger leaders. We need capable ones, however old they are." The audience erupted in applause, half cheering, half whispering in awe. The tension in the room was thick, but now it carried respect. Even Joy, smiling faintly, tilted her head, acknowledging his point. Jane Moore leaned forward toward the camera. "Well, folks, I think we can all agree this is one of the most passionate and thought-provoking debates we've had. Michael, Joy, you've really made the audience think today." Michael nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. "Thank you. I hope it makes people see that contribution doesn't retire, purpose doesn't retire, and life's work isn't bound by a number." The applause swelled, the audience rising to their feet. Cameras panned across faces, some nodding, some teary-eyed, all deeply moved. The debate had reached its crescendo, not with anger, but with the raw force of ideas laid bare. Joy exhaled, leaning back in her chair. "All right, Michael, you've made your case loud and clear. I'm not sure I agree entirely, but you've given me a lot to think about." Michael's smile was quiet but firm. "That's all I ask. Thoughtful reflection, not blind adherence. That's how change begins." The commercial break cue came up, and the audience erupted again, applause echoing through the studio. The breaking point had been reached, not with a clash of tempers, but with the raw force of ideas laid bare. When the cameras returned, the studio had shifted from tension to reflection. Michael J. Fox leaned back slightly, a faint smile playing across his lips, the weight of the discussion still evident in his eyes. Joy Behar, usually quick with a quip,
now sat in thoughtful silence, her arms resting on the desk, her gaze steady. The room felt quieter, almost reverent. "Michael," Whoopi began, her voice gentle, "I think what we saw today wasn't just a debate about politics. It was a lesson about respect, dedication, and the value of experience." Michael nodded. "Exactly, Whoopi. Age isn't a limitation, it's a lens. Every year we live, every challenge we overcome adds depth to our perspective. That's why arbitrary rules about retirement or age are dangerous. They can strip wisdom away before it's fully shared." Joy exhaled, letting some of her tension go. "You know," she said, her voice softer, "I still worry about energy and capacity, but I can see what you're saying. Maybe the real issue isn't age at all. Maybe it's commitment, clarity, and willingness to serve responsibly." "Commitment matters more than years," Michael agreed. "I've faced obstacles most people can't imagine, but I keep moving forward because purpose doesn't retire. It evolves. And that's what leaders, young or old, should do. Evolve, adapt, and continue to contribute as long as they are able." The audience erupted in applause, some standing, some cheering, a few wiping away tears. The applause wasn't just for Michael. It was for the honesty, the integrity, and the courage to speak truths that often go unspoken in public debate. Sonny Hostin leaned in, nodding. "I think what we've witnessed today is a reminder that leadership isn't about age. It's about dedication, responsibility, and the human spirit." Michael smiled, humbled. "Thank you. That's all I wanted to show. That people have more to give than numbers suggest. And maybe, if we listen carefully, we'll learn from everyone who continues to serve with heart and purpose." Joy finally smiled, a mixture of respect and acknowledgement. "All right, Michael, you've made your point. Maybe we need to think differently about what we consider old, young, or capable." Whoopi summed it up perfectly. Maybe the lesson isn't about retirement age or arbitrary limits. Maybe it's about ensuring that anyone in a position of power, regardless of age, remains awake, aware, and committed to serving the people. The camera panned across the audience, who stood and applauded once more, faces glowing with inspiration. The atmosphere had shifted from confrontation to contemplation. As the show wrapped up, Michael shook hands with Joy. There was no lingering tension now, just mutual respect. "Thank you for the conversation," he said quietly. Joy nodded. "Thank you, Michael. It's been enlightening." The segment ended with the camera pulling back, leaving viewers with a lasting impression. Wisdom and dedication can't be measured by a number, and true service never retires. The final tease? After the camera stopped rolling, Michael did something that left the staff and audience speechless.